guess where we came from when we didn't have the word limit is that we did get a whole heap of just stuff dumped and, 80-page responses, which just made us really cranky, can I say? So, if you've got 80 pages to write, well, something's wrong if you can't actually get everything in that. So our philosophy was, if you actually have to be succinct in what you're saying, which is really, that's a sign of a specialisation, that you understand the concepts and you can simplify it so that your lay clients can understand it. That's one of the important criteria. So that's what we're looking at. So you need to be able to look at what the issues are, synthesise it, and then clearly and succinctly answer the question or draft the document or whatever it may be. So you want to focus on all the issues. You want to make sure you address all the issues. But if it's a non-issue, you might address it in a sentence. If it's a critical issue, then you'll weigh it up in the balance of what's there. So I guess that's what we're looking for, and that assessment as well of what are the important issues and what are the not so important issues is also something we can pick up from how much time people spend on different things. Mm.
So it might assist to bullet point your responses, so you actually have some structure to it. In the piece of work.
Depends what sort of work it is. It will depend.
I'm not suggesting that with your take-home mock file, for example, that you bullet point that, but I'm thinking just designing your responses prior to starting work on the substantive response, so that you can eliminate as much of the garbage or the surplus to requirement.
And doing an outline like that will really help you because, as you will expect in the material that you're given, there will be lots of issues. And so, you'll need to almost read through it a few times and develop an outline and make sure that you pick up all of the issues. But you might have to read it a few times before you actually do identify everything. So it helps to have some notes as you're going and an outline to work through.
And sometimes when I was reviewing papers, when I was sitting on the board, sometimes the answers are quite simple and straightforward. Now I'm talking now the exam questions. Sometimes it's not hard at all. It's just not much, maybe a paragraph in your answer. So I think that's where the bullet pointing in, of issues might be really helpful, is in a high pressure exam situation.
In just one comment that I will make, in an exam situation, we obviously accept bullet points and abbreviations, and so long as it's legible, try to be legible. I've got the worst writing in the world, so it's easy for me to say that. But try to be legible, because if we can't read it, we can't identify it. But when it comes to that take-home assessment and you've got plenty of time to check your grammar and check your spelling and those things, if you hand in something that is full of errors, then that will be taken into consideration. There are marks allocated for that presentation as well. So there's usually 3 separate parts. So the exam is the same, usually 3 separate parts. Sometimes there's short answers as well. But the take-home assessment, yes, will be broken into 3. So then you'll have 3 possibly very distinct questions or issues to deal with to each part. You'll be given a word limit for each question on each paper that you're looking at. So there's rules about that. So I think we may, I can't remember what we decided last year and whatever, so don't hold me to this, but I have a feeling we went to a word limit rather than a page limit, and we required you to have your font in a particular size and your lines in a particular spacing, and your footnotes. There was rules about footnotes as well, so you can't hide lots of text in footnotes. We do see that stuff. We do know what's going on. No. no, we don't expect you to put citations in exam answers. Some people do. If you're that clever that you know the citations off by heart, go for it. But we don't expect that in an exam situation.
Angela, I remember when I sat accreditation, part of the take-home assignment was a letter to a client, and because you want to write a letter to a client in layman's terms, but I wanted to exhibit to the examiner that I knew the reasons why I was telling the client this, and rather than bulking the letter up with references to cases and legislation, I footnoted the letter. And I've never asked anyone, is that the appropriate thing to do?
It is the appropriate thing to do.
That's a relief.
But we give fairly clear guidelines in our questions. And so if we ask you to draft a letter to the client, we will be very specific in there about we expect you to make references to cases and legislation as appropriate. So usually we're very clear on that now.
Yeah. Okay.
But with that mock file, I can't reiterate what they said on the panel before. It's amazing how quickly that time goes past, that 3 weeks. And I can't recall stopping work. I don't think I had time off. But I had to work consistently on it every evening and most weekends. So if I learnt something from the family law accreditation, then the succession, I didn't muck around with that mock file. Don't underestimate the time you need to put into that.
I had to sprint to the QLS and managed to get here 5 minutes before close off.
Yeah.
And I had worked on it consistently
Yeah.
over a period of time that I had access to it. So.
And because it's practical and because it's areas of law which you are probably very interested in and you can underestimate it by looking at the question and think, oh, gee, this is great, I know this, I know how to do this. But when it comes time to putting it in a very succinct way to be marked, time just flies. So that's my comment.
There's probably some sense in the thought that you have 3 weeks of 3 questions. So there's a pretty clear allocation of the time you should be spending.
Well, I started by using the course outline the year prior to the one relevant to my accreditation assessment. So it would have been, I sat in 2011, so I accessed the 2009 one, and I started working on that 12 months prior. I know that this is probably disheartening given we're only a few months out. And so I read all of those cases identified, and I broke it into folders, hard copy folders of information relating to each area. And you can have multiple areas within an area of succession, like multiple areas of administration, multiple areas of succession planning, multiple areas of estate litigation, multiple areas of issues that might relate to powers of attorney. I broke it down into small groups and had a folder on each of those, and then on my computer I had a soft copy of that. I summarised every case so that I had a case summary of my own for every case. So I had case summaries of about 300 cases. And then I also did sort of examples of ways that I would answer questions that might arise. Probably the most important part of all of that was making my notes accessible to myself in electronic form, because there was not enough time. I took two suitcases of hard copy material into the exam. I didn't touch it. There was not time, but I did touch my computer. And it was just simple things like there was a question that cropped up, and I thought, I know that case, but I can't remember the name of it, but I know that there was a Filipino woman involved. And so I searched Philippines, and the case came up in my system, my electronic system. So just really quick ways of resolving that. Where was that in my notes was, I think, what made me successful in that written exam, because you literally start and you look up and it's over.
I also
Does that help? Does that answer your question
That-
even? Or
that-
did I just
That
ramble?
scares me.
I think the thing about me was, and there might be people in the room who are similar to me, I was quite a junior practitioner, and I probably still am. When I sat the exam, I was only just 5 years across my admission date. I had been practicing exclusively in succession for that period of time, but and I thought I knew a lot. But when I studied to the extent that was required, I really felt that I didn't know much before I started. And so, yeah, for the more junior practitioners in the room or those who have come newly to succession law, there is a lot that you don't know, and that you, even if you think you're ticking all the boxes every day when you're seeing clients, it's amazing what you don't know.
Can I say I did what you did, Francis? I just used the outline as my guide, read those cases. I suppose I concentrated on the cases. Just as far as seminar papers and presentations, insofar as they might prompt debate or discussion about how those cases were important, I found that very helpful. And but relying on just practical experience, what you do and how they then apply to practical problems. So I also had folders.
Yeah.
I still have my
folders.
I still have my folders with the
Odd
cases.
relationship with my folders.
You don't have time in the exam, even though it's open book, to look at notes. The way the questions were designed when I did it, they were always sort of off point. You know, there was always that real interesting little point that was different from what the cases might have presented you or what other learned readings might have said. So you had to really be analytical about it. So that was, I can remember, that was how most of the exam time was spent. Would you agree with that? Analysing?
It's probably a fair comment to say that there's a lot of information, and obviously if you look to read everything in the area, like you just wouldn't be possible. So many textbooks and so many articles and so many seminar papers. So I think if you need to get a starting point, the reading guide is designed for a reason, and the recommended reading guide, is there as a secondary resource. So there's a lot of thought gone into that, and so that does try to help, I think, focus what you might start with. And then if you do have the time, go to that next level. But probably all I can say.
Yeah. Use it. I suppose there are some really complicated areas in succession law, and sometimes the text can be a little confusing. So some of that secondary reading material, and particularly some of the material that might come from other states, might be helpful in dealing with some of those really, you might read something and you might read it half a dozen times and think, oh, really, what does this mean? But then you can read it a different way in another text. And so for those confusing bits, I think secondary material.
Some clarity.
Yeah.
I think also, I was relatively close to having left university, so I still had some exam strategy in my recent history. And so I guess for those who have been out of uni a lot longer than I was at the time, revisit exam strategy, because it's not just about having the knowledge, it's about how to manage your time and how to take advantage of the parts of the exam that are short answer, really slam them out. You're not meant to write half a page on something that's inviting you to, reference that a case or a piece of legislation. And then when you get to the long answers, use your reading time. I can't remember, is there reading time with half an hour? Use your reading time to structure at least one of the long answers, so that when you get to the stage of writing that in the exam, you can follow that structure and have provided yourself with some guidance within that half an hour when you can't really do much else.
You may get a little bit of information beforehand. The day before, when you finish is that right, Deborah? The day before when you finish the written exam. And it sometimes, of course, depends on what area it might be in. So there might be a deliberate decision that you go in cold. There might be a deliberate decision that the client's delivered some information to you beforehand. So
I think also what I took from sitting Spec Accred is don't give up at any stage of the process. Don't assume that you've done something badly and there's no point leading the rest. I think everyone I've spoken to who has gone through Spec Accred has faltered in terms of their confidence at some stage. So be kind to yourself, as Carla said in the other room, and be confident in your ability and what you've produced. Don't give up until the fat lady sings.
Don't let evil.
Don't let your evil side
and once you've done all that work,
reduce your confidence.
then you know, go through it. Even if you don't pass, you'll gain skills in completing each of those areas that if you don't pass it, like that fellow was saying next door, will actually stand you very well for the next attempt. So
yeah.
Any other questions? You are, but you're not allowed to type your answers. Is that? Phones handed in at the door, aren't they? Anything else that anyone wanted to ask about anything to do with the process? I think there's a lot of value in having a go at those, because if nothing else, it'll start to give you a sense of the denseness, maybe, and the complexity of some of those questions. And as Frances said, maybe you can have a practice so that if you haven't studied for a while, you can set yourself in that exam situation for timing and just time management,
Because
really.
it's no point if you can complete that exam in 7 hours. It's not going to help with the with the 2 or 3 hours you have.
So it doesn't necessarily matter if you get it wrong or right, if I can put it that way, but at least if you have a go, I think you'll start to, it'll help your study.
I completed all of those past exams that I could get my hands on, and lots of them led me to things that I didn't know I was weak on. So I think it's definitely beneficial to go through the past exams and try to complete them. So 50% of each question, that means, so if you've got part A, B and C within the written exam, you have to get 50% on each of those parts.
Yes, you do. You definitely have to pass each part. The 65% pass rate is no longer, is it? So it's 50% across everything. But when you come to the interview, you'll have probably 5 assessment criteria, and that pass mark applies to each part of that. That's right. You'll be provided with all of that assessment criteria before. You'll kind of have an understanding. The other important thing to understand, and it's probably, I might have missed it because I was running a bit late, you must pass every piece of assessment. So if you get 80% for your take home and you get 60% for your written exam and you get 30% for your interview, unfortunately you will fail. See, you're all raring to go. Probably there's a general consistency. About 2/3 will fail.
But that's not because we deliberately mark 2/3. We don't go. We
don't.
go into this saying, okay, if there's 20 people who want to be specialised, we want to make 20 people, we want to give them a pass. But for various reasons, there's some who will not meet that standard and they cannot pass.
No,
Not to
that's right.
say that.
And it can be for various reasons. And I think the key is that to be an accredited specialist, you know, you have to be at a certain level. And so it's reflected in the assessments as to the level of expectation that's there. So that's what really flows through.
No, it's not about studying to pass an exam and the exam being very hard. It's just a vibe.
It's and Michelle's right. It's not just a cram session when you can
for the
spit
next
it
4
out.
months.
You will need to have a very good comprehension of the area of law. That's what will get tested. So it's not just regurgitating facts of a case or you know, this is what I do here. We will be testing that underlying knowledge and understanding, and
it's
that's what shows through.
It
some-
does.
Sometimes, sorry,
sorry.
you're sure you go.
It's amazing, like, I'm still learning, and it's just that continual base, I suppose, line knowledge and experience, and then a development of that every single year or every time you do something. So that's really what we're trying to assess, not this ability to pass an exam.
Yeah,
Even though you need to pass the exam.
you do need to pass the exam. But I was just going to say that sometimes it's not just learned knowledge. There is an element of your experience through practice. And so if it's the case that you haven't had the breadth of practice that's necessary, sometimes that can be a difficult thing to overcome. An application of these concepts in practice is a big...
And the judgment calls about
where to go.
what's the really important issues and what are the not so important issues that I spend my time on, and I can demonstrate that I've worked through that and I can make the call. You know, those are the things that all form part of it. Don't sigh so much.
Do you know, I suppose if you're doing this because you really love this area and you're interested in this area, you can fail the exam, but you can't fail, because you do have to devote yourself to this reading list. You do have to think about what you're doing insofar as focusing on passing these assessments. I did finish that and think, okay, I learnt so much, and if I have to go and do it again, I was determined to do it again, because I believe there's no failure in that. It's all about your own self-improvement, and the benefits and advantages you get from it, I think, should not be underestimated on any level.
I'm not 100% sure when the board made that change.
I do know that I haven't been on the board for a couple of years.
I have a feeling it might have come through before we sat, before the last group sat, so
See,
that's the year before last.
It's interesting. I do know the reason behind the change was to bring our assessment on the same type of assessment basis as you find in university. And in universities, the pass mark was 50%. When I was on the board, we were assured in reducing the pass mark 65 to 50%, we weren't reducing the standard as such, because there's still an expectation when we're doing the assessment now at 50% that the standard is at a specialist level. So I don't know if there's much difference in a 65% and a 50% pass mark as far as the percentages or the numbers go. I think it's more about a standard, the quality of.
I think also you will be terribly disappointed if you fail. I know, I'm assuming this from what I would have felt and what I thought I would be feeling before the marks came out. But there is everyone who has gone through the process, whether they have passed or failed, will hold only respect for you for attempting it. There is no shame in failing, and some of the really great practitioners around the traps have had to do it twice, simply, as the chap in there said, yes, it is a client interview, but under different circumstances to normal, really, under exam circumstances, and sometimes you can just have a bad day.
It's probably a discretionary application, but if you put all of that information, then the committee can consider it. So if you particularly detail the experience that you may have had in the UK, but I wouldn't see it as a reason not to. Yeah, I think you definitely should put in a discretionary application. We don't check timesheets to make sure you're the 50% of work in the area. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, then hope you got some helpful tips and information from tonight, and look forward to seeing you and wish you all the best.